So you have a friend who's interested in Christianity, but doesn't really know what to believe. They don't know if they believe in God. They don't know if they believe in Jesus. Maybe they've looked into arguments for and against Christianity, and they're still not sure. A person in a situation like this could rightly be called agnostic. And being agnostic is not a great place to be, especially if you don't want to be there. If you want certainty or you want confidence, being agnostic is about the most uncomfortable place you could be. But what if I told you it was simpler? You don't have to prove God and Jesus up and down in every way that they can be proven. What if I told you that there are actually only 2 questions that need to be answered in order for an agnostic person to make the transition confidently into Christianity? Well, I think that that's actually the case. So today we're going to explore those 2 questions and try and know our faith to the best of our abilities. So let's get into it. Okay, so before I tell you what the 2 questions are, I want to go over a little bit of housekeeping explaining the questions. The first thing is, these questions are meant to help someone to make an intellectual assent to Christianity. People have lots of reasons for not becoming Christians. These include experiential, according to their experience, emotional, you can guess what that is, and moral, which is according to their own intrinsic feelings of what is right and wrong. Those usually apply to things like in the Old Testament, violence, stuff like that. So various things will hold them back from becoming a Christian or believing in God or whatever. And these things are not merely intellectual. So the question that I am proposing today that people ask and answer are not experiential, moral, or emotional. So you might make significant progress by convincing someone of the intellectual aspects of Christianity, but that doesn't mean that they will be therefore strong-armed into becoming a Christian. Instead, that's where true friendship, true care for their soul, and true Christian love actually comes into play. You can convince someone logically, you can debate them down or whatever, but what changes people's hearts is the love of God. And so we shouldn't look at these questions as a be-all, end-all, but instead as a beginning to get someone along the road to accepting Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. The second thing is the question of how it is that we as humans make decisions in our day-to-day lives. And it is not with absolute certainty. I feel that in the modern world, a lot of people expect that for big questions, such as religion, the existence of God, Jesus Christ, for these types of things, they need an absolute certainty. And if there is any doubt, if there are any good arguments against them, then they have to throw the whole thing away. They can't trust in Christianity at all unless they are absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, positive that it is true. But the thing is, that's not how we make decisions in the real world. Nobody makes decisions that way. And since nobody makes decisions that way, this is not a decision that we should make that way for God. And here's an example if that doesn't quite make sense to you. So say you go to a 4-year university, you expect that if you pass all of your classes, pass all your classes and pay them money, buckets of money. At the end of those 4 years, you're going to walk across the stage, shake the hand of the president of the university, and he's going to give you your diploma. Or in my case, a case that the diploma goes in that the diploma wasn't in. Instead, they mailed it to me weeks later. But regardless, you expect you're going to get your diploma. Now, let's say that day comes, you shake hands with the president, and he says, well, I know in the past, when people graduated, we gave them diplomas, but we figured it would be better now to just give you a firm handshake and tell you, the diploma was really the friends you made along the way and all the fun experiences you had here in college. Well, that would be unsatisfactory and nobody expects that to happen. But is it technically impossible that that could happen? Well, no, it isn't. The people who run the university have free will. They can do that if they really wanted to. But you still can have confidence that it's not going to happen, even though there's a possibility that it could happen. And so what I'm basically arguing is that every decision we make is made with confidence, which is two words put together, con, meaning with, fide, meaning faith. So every decision we make is made based on faith. And all I am asking at the outset of these questions is that you make these decisions. You ask these questions with faith, instead of with this idea that I need Cartesian absolute certainty for every decision I make. So with that being said, what are the two questions which can make an agnostic person a Christian? I add air quotes because really that's a gross simplification, but here's the first one. Is it more likely than not that God exists? The second question is it more likely than not that Jesus Christ was raised from the dead? If a person answers yes to both of these questions, I believe that they have every reason in the world to make an intellectual assent to Christianity. Why is that, though? Well, let's first look at the wording. So I'm asking, is it more likely than not? Because again, we make our decisions based on confidence, based on faith. We don't make them based on absolute knowledge. And so I think it's a bad question to ask someone, does God exist? Did Jesus rise from the dead? Those questions are unanswerable. No one is able to go back in time 2,000 years and see Jesus rise from the dead. No one is able to go back to the foundations of the universe and watch God wave his magical God hand and speak the universe into being. Instead, we can look around us and we can make inferences based on that which we can observe, that which we can know, that which we can contemplate with our intellect, and we can determine, at least to us, what is more likely out of these options. Now, why are the questions worded in the order that they're in? So I specifically insist that the questions be asked as I laid them. Is it more likely than not that God exists? Is it more likely than not that Jesus Christ was raised from the dead? The reason that we go in that order is because if you don't believe in the God thing, then the Jesus thing makes no sense. It is logically incoherent from a naturalistic or materialistic worldview, meaning all there is the physical world, that a man would die, rot for 3 days, and then come back to life, perfectly healthy, still with the wounds in him, right? Because the Gospels don't describe Jesus as being suffering and weak and like sickly when he comes back. It's not like he just survived being crucified. He came back 3 days later and he was fine. So under natural means, we don't expect that. That doesn't happen. And so the only way that Jesus rises from the dead is by a miracle. And the only way a miracle happens is by something supernatural, something beyond nature, beyond the physical world, bringing him back to life. And in general, the only way that happens is by God. So God has to exist, something supernatural, something outside of this physical realm for the second question to make any sense. So we answer that question first. If you can say, yes, it's more likely than not that God exists, then we move on to the second one. Now, why is the second one so important? And why isn't it just, is it more likely than not that Jesus exists? Or is it more likely than not that he commissioned the apostles? Or blah, 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 blah. Is it more likely than not that Jesus is God? Which is a great question. But we focus on the resurrection because that is the defining historical fact of Christianity. Unlike other religions, Christianity is based on a truth claim that is, at least to some extent, verifiable. Take Islam, for example. There are truth claims in Islam, but those truth claims are totally unverifiable, such as Muhammad's first interaction with the angel, how he received his initial revelation that brought about the writing of the Quran. Those things are not verifiable today. But Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection was a public event, both of them. And so we can look at the historical record internally and externally, internally being like the Gospels, externally being writers who were unaffiliated with Christianity, and we can come to a conclusion about whether or not this historical event actually happened, because it wasn't a private thing. And so if we can determine, Jesus raised from the dead, the way by which we determine that requires a certain confidence in the historical reliability of the Gospels. And if you have that confidence in the Gospels, then the rest of Christianity will follow. Paul even says, if Jesus is not raised, then our faith is for nothing, and we should be pitied above all men. So the Bible itself identifies the resurrection as the single most important event in Christianity, the most identifying event in Christianity. And so that is why we identify it as our second question. And so these two questions put together can lead someone to believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and that by that information, by that inquiry, that he is God in the flesh. So how do we defend these 2 points? Because under this idea, you're having a conversation with a friend. You're trying to convince them and bring them into the fold. Here are a couple of ways, I'll give one for each question, that you can at least start your friend on the road to figuring this out. A couple of questions that they need to be asking themselves that I think will run them into a wall. And that wall is Christianity. So just to get your friend to start really thinking about God, and not necessarily to get them to believe or become Christian, a good first question might be, what started the universe? Or more broadly, where did everything come from? And there are really 3 main answers to this question that people tend to entertain. Answer 1 is that there is something which lies beyond space, time, and the universe which started them all. Christians call that thing God. Answer 2 is that the Big Bang started it all, which is technically not false, but it's also kind of a non-explanation, and we'll get into why. Answer 3 is that the universe, or whatever surrounds the universe, is an eternal thing, like a set of dominoes that just goes on forever. Some proponents of that idea might advocate for the Big Crunch theory, saying the universe expands and contracts cyclically forever. Answers 2 and 3 suffer from the same critical flaw, that being that they are insufficient to explain why motion or change happens at all. And what I'm referencing here is Thomas Aquinas' argument for God's existence from motion. It's also called the first way. The basic idea is that everything that exists is going from a state of potential, something which could be different than it is, to actual, how something actually presently is. For example, a piece of raw chicken is actually raw, but potentially cooked, meaning it could be cooked, but it's not yet. Fire, on the other hand, is actually hot. So you put raw chicken over a fire, and the fire, which is actually hot, actualizes the raw chicken into being cooked. According to Aquinas, this is kind of how everything in the universe works. Now, he also says that a thing which is potential can't actualize itself. If you leave the raw chicken on the counter for 8 hours, it's not going to magically turn itself into delicious grilled chicken. Instead, it might be actualized by bacteria and start to go rotten. So since everything in the universe is going from a state of potential to actual, and we know that potential things aren't going around actualizing themselves, we have this issue of a chain that goes back infinitely. If someone says the Big Bang started the universe, we have to ask them what actualized the Big Bang, because at one point, as a singularity, it was pure potential. And then it was actualized with this giant explosion that created everything. Where did that actualization come from? Similarly, if we say that the universe is this infinite set of dominoes, going from potential to actual, this still doesn't explain why anything is actual to begin with. Where did this actuality come from? Why is there motion at all? Why are things changing at all? If the universe was merely a set of perfectly stationary, unchanging Lego bricks that have been around eternally, those questions wouldn't be a problem.
But since the universe is changing, we have to ask, where does the change come from? So, when we look at these three options, the universe being started by the Big Bang, the universe being an infinite chain of causes causing other causes, or there being an external cause to the universe, which itself was uncaused, a cause which is purely actual rather than potential, we can see that the third option actually makes the most sense. If we go back to our analogy of the universe as an infinite set of falling dominoes, and ask the question, well, why are the dominoes falling? Which is essentially what I've been asking you. Why is change happening? Why is motion occurring? Then the theist, the Christian, can answer that question by saying, well, it looks like someone set up the dominoes and then knocked them down. While the naturalist, the materialist, the atheist, is left with nothing to say except, well, falling is just what dominoes do. Now, I would never say that this argument definitively proves the existence of the Christian God of the Bible, because that's not what it's meant to do. And that's not what I set out to do when I started on this section. If you recall, this is to get your friend to start thinking about God, to consider things that they might not have otherwise considered. And for that purpose, I believe this argument works great, and it opens up the conversation to a whole new level. A couple of books I could suggest to help if you'd like to learn more about this are Answering Atheism by Trent Horn and The 5 Arguments for God's Existence by Ed Feser. Trent Horn is an astonishingly articulate and intelligent apologist for Catholic answers, and I have loved every one of his books that I've read, while Ed Feser is a philosopher and a professor who specializes in Thomistic philosophy, which has a lot of work done on the existence of God. A good second question to ask your friend is, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, why did the apostles go to their deaths claiming that he did? Now, with any claim like this, you might say it's not so amazing that someone goes to death for something that they believe in strongly. And you're absolutely right about that. Even an atheist might go to their deaths for a principle that they feel strongly in their hearts. But that's not the situation with the apostles. The apostles were going around preaching that they had seen Jesus Christ raised from the dead. And when someone claims that they have seen something, there's really only three options for explaining that. Option one is that they are lying about what they have seen, and that they have not actually seen whatever thing it is that they're referring to. Option two is that they're confused or mistaken or crazy or something like that. They think that they saw him, and their belief that they saw him is legitimate, but they are simply mistaken. Option three is that they actually saw the thing that they said that they saw. Now, it doesn't seem that the apostles were mistaken about what they had seen. This is a guy who they had traveled with for several years, and they would have been very well acquainted with exactly what he looked like. It's not as though they could have just been duped and someone who looks kind of like Jesus happens to appear 3 days later with all of his scars and claims like, hey, it's me, Jesus, I'm back, I've risen from the dead. That seems unlikely. And it's also unlikely that they hallucinated all of this, because shared hallucinations like that just don't happen with human psychology. So that leaves us with two, in my opinion, much more realistic options. That he lied, or that he actually really rose from the dead. Now, between these two things, the naturalistic explanation would obviously tend towards the idea that they lied, but there's one huge problem with that. If they were lying about that, they were in a position to know whether or not it was true. And so when the Romans come knocking on the door and they say, recant your belief in this Jesus guy or we're going to kill you, which it seems we have some early records that suggest, yeah, that's kind of actually what the Romans did. They gave people a chance to recant and worship pagan idols. You would know that now your life is on the line. And so your option is basically die or admit to the lie that you have been preaching. Now, who in their right mind would go to death for a thing that they made up and they know that they made up?
That does not make any sense. Now, it is traditionally held that this didn't happen once, twice, 3 times, but 11 times out of the 12 apostles, with John being the only one who we traditionally hold died a natural death of old age. Now, is it true that all 11 of these apostles died as martyrs? I personally believe that it is. It's been traditionally held for a very long time, but there is some doubt to be cast on that. And so when we're making this argument to a friend, we don't want to use the version of the argument that we would like to be most true. Even though I would like to say that all of the apostles died as martyrs except for John, the historical record is less clear on that. And so I tend to go with what historian, biblical scholar Sean McDowell says on the subject, which is that we can have essentially 100% certainty that 4 of the 11 alleged martyred apostles did die for what they claimed to have seen, with a greater than 50% chance of 2 more apostles also having been martyred. Now, does this mean that these are the only people who were actually martyred? No, that is not what that means. But what it means is that in terms of our historical records, and not just what the tradition has held, we have the highest certainty with these people. And the people are as follows. For 100% certainty, we have Peter, Paul, James, brother of Jesus, and James, the brother of John. And in addition, he argues that Thomas and Andrew are the ones with a greater than 50% chance of having been martyred. And so when we make this argument towards other people, towards our friends, stuff like that, we're going to want to use the safer numbers and insist that tradition is also a reliable source. And so we have good reason to believe that even more than that were martyred. If you're interested in reading more about this argument and other arguments for Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, I highly recommend the book, The Case for Jesus by Brant Petrie. I have never read a book by him that I didn't absolutely love, and so I think that you're going to love it too if you take a look.
So, to sum up the entire video in just a couple of sentences, is it more likely than not that God exists? And is it more likely than not that Jesus Christ was raised from the dead? These are the 2 most important questions that anyone can ask themselves to become a Christian and start following Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. Inspecting these questions, one has to answer, why does anything exist rather than not exist? And why did the apostles die for their faith? These 2 questions, I think, when followed to their logical end, will eventually arrive at someone making the leap and crossing the Tiber. Thanks for watching. God bless.